Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk about the one fraud that really shook me to my core. It wasn't overly complex, but it was brutally effective. So the most popular type of business fraud that we see at the moment is something called business email compromise, or BEC. I mean, it's so popular it's got its own TLA, so take that for what it is. But at the core of business email compromise fraud is quite simple. You're going to appear to get an email from someone you know and you trust asking you to do something. It's not, it's coming from a fraudster. But because you know and you trust that person, you're more likely to take that action, and that means you're more likely to fall for the fraud. So look, most of us, when we get a dodgy text or email, fairly easy to spot that it's a scam. The grammar's appalling, it's asking us to do something we don't want to do, and it's from someone we don't know. The problem is when you come to a good business email compromise fraud, a lot of those things fall away and it looks like a genuine email from someone you know. So a little bit of background around the company I'm talking about today. I'm not going to mention names, but they're a services company. Now, prior to COVID, they used to sign invoices by having pieces of paper, walking around the office, and people would put their signature on it. The AP person would then check the signatures against an approved list, and if it had the required authorization, they'd pay it. Once COVID came along, they couldn't use that method anymore because people weren't walking around the office. So they decided to start using emails to send round invoices and say, hey, can you prove this? Unfortunately, email is email and people are people, and old habits die hard. And what people in the organization started doing is that they would forward this email chain onto the supplier saying, hey, good news, your invoice has been approved, it's going to be in the next payment run. Now, through fair means or foul, the scammers got hold of a bunch of these emails and they actually started learning about them. They started learning the language that people used when they were approving invoices. They started learning the process that was required for approving an invoice. And what's more, they started learning some of the details about the organization, things like department names and cost center numbers. Before you knew it, they had the knowledge required to pull off one hell of a scam. Now, in this point of the video is where I start talking about the things that scared me. There was absolutely no evidence that a hacker had got in and had any access to the internal systems. There was no evidence that they'd hacked into the network, that they'd hacked into the email system, and there wasn't even any evidence that anyone had given away their username and password. What they'd done is they'd taken information that wasn't considered confidential, but was very business specific, and they'd tailored a specific email using that language to make it look like it came from inside the company rather than externally. So when we went and had a look at the email, one thing that really struck me was the language was right. When you've worked with someone for years, you know how they talk, you know how they speak, and you know how they write emails, and everything was fine. Everything was perfect. They also included things like people shortening their names. Not a nickname necessarily, but just the way they sign off their emails was right. The department information, all that internal information was also right. The codes were right. They meant the right things. The scammers also had some idea on what the process was required to get this invoice approved. So they were displaying that internal knowledge. Lastly, and I think most scarily, is they actually included a grammatical error that the CEO was known to make all the time. There was seriously nothing wrong with this invoice email. The only thing that was actually wrong was a very small dot up in the from address, which meant that if you replied to this, you were going to reply to the scammer, not to your boss. So fundamentally, there really wasn't anything wrong with this email. The information was fine, the language was fine. There was none of those red flags that we normally associate with a scam. This was a pretty good attempt, and the only way that the company caught it was through a bit of dumb luck. By chance, the CEO and the CFO used to live in the same suburb, and by a bigger chance, they just happened to go out walking at the same time of night. CFO meets the CEO, says, hey, I've got that invoice, it's going to be in the next payment run. CEO says, I've got no idea what you're talking about, and that leads to an investigation. So what's the key lesson here? What's the takeaway? And this is the bit, I suppose, that as a professional really scared me. No one had actually done anything wrong. No one had given away their username and password. No one had been hacked. No one had even gone away from the agreed process of the company. Everything seemed fine, right? Well, wrong. The assumption that email was a secure way of handling this transaction was actually the problem in the first place. Email is not as secure as everyone likes. Obviously, we all get scam emails, but it's really easy for people to send emails and appear for it to come from someone else. And that was the key lesson learned. So as a professional accountant, when you're looking at these sorts of processes in your organization, go away from email as a transactional approval process. If you can use a separate application like an AP automation tool or a purchasing tool that has separate approval workflows built within the application, use that. If you can't and you're a small business and you think that email is really the only way you can communicate, still use it for your transactions, but then add a manual step at the end. Go old school, pick up the phone, ring somebody, actually get them to verbally confirm that this transaction is all right and we can pay it. I'm Andrew Chapman. If you like my content, hit the subscribe button. Also, if you've got any questions or comments, put them in down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for watching.